President Joe Biden's first State of the Union speech ended with a call for unity, strength, and patriotism.
The State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. We are stronger today. We are stronger today than we were a year ago. And we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today. This is our moment to meet and overcome the challenges of our time.
So the speech was really an opportunity for President Biden to turn the tables on his low approval ratings. So how did he do? Well, political analyst Tara Dowdell and Joe Pinion joining us this morning to rate President Biden's speech. Good to see you both. Thanks for being here. I know you stayed up late.
Good to be here.
All right, yeah, we all stayed up late to watch this one. So President Biden had a lot of ground to cover, but he came out the gate with stricter sanctions as expected and a very stern message for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's listen to that.
Tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy.
Tara, let me begin with you here. President Biden had a lot, right, to manage expectations when it comes to what the U.S. can and cannot do here. What are your thoughts on how he addressed the Ukraine issue?
Well, I thought he handled the issue very well. I think it was important for him to let people know that the United States is leading on this issue. One line of attack that the Republicans have leveled at him is that he's weak, and that's why Ukraine was invaded by Russia. In fact, this conflict started in 2014 and continued throughout the Trump administration as well. Russia invaded Crimea first and has continued to escalate and was always going to invade Ukraine. But what was important was the response. That's what mattered. And what Biden spent time talking about was how the United States has led in responding, achieving just global support for Ukraine. One of the big announcements he made was the tapping of the strategic oil reserves by a global community so that they could help to at least mitigate some of the rising gas prices across the world. And so I think it was important for him to talk about how the United States is leading and how so much of what is happening with NATO and with the support for Ukraine is the result of that leadership.
But he did emphasize, though, that U.S. troops wouldn't be fighting on the ground there. So do you think that he went far enough when it comes to Russia, Joe?
Look, I think it was heartened. As I said, I think it was a common ground speech without an actual action plan to achieve the shared purpose that we are all seeking. I think when you look on the issue as it relates to Ukraine, yes, I'm heartened to hear that the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, days after the sovereign nation of Ukraine has been invaded, has chosen to close off American airspace to Russian flights. But I think that we have to talk about the hard truth. The hard truth is that, to my colleague's point, yes, the invasion of Ukraine was inevitable. Which is why we should have taken preemptive measures to do everything humanly possible to make sure that it never happened. Russia basically telegraphed the playbook to the American people, starting with their attacks on this nation. They hacked 1/5 of our beef supply with the JBS beef hack in May of last year. They hacked 45% of the fuel to the eastern seaboard of this nation with that Colonial Pipeline hack in May of last year. Our rudderless response, our effectual non-response, effectively gave them the blueprint to have the cyber attacks that we see the nation of Ukraine currently experiencing, all while Vladimir Putin drives those tanks across the border. So yes, we need to make sure that we have a strong response. It's heartening to see that we are standing with our allies and standing up to Vladimir Putin. But the work of making sure that the Ukrainian people were safe and that the global community remained intact started long ago. And in that matter, we certainly fell asleep on the job.
All right, there's a lot to get to with this speech, right? So let's move on to the next topic here, because as we head towards the midterm elections, inflation and the economy are really top priority for so many across this country and our area. President Biden vowed to level the playing field, really, when it comes to taxes. Listen.
Let me say this again. Nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in new taxes. Not a single penny.
So, Tara, he spelled out this 4-point plan for dealing with inflation, right, which included extending the child care tax credit, raising the minimum wage. How likely, though, are these to get approved by Congress? Because he needs their help.
That's the challenge. That's the rub right there. You just said it, Dan. It is going to be a challenge for him to get that across the finish line. But the thing is, there is broad support across the American public for the child tax credits. For instance, the child tax credits combined with the earned income tax credit, something else that Republicans typically support, except when Democrats want to do it. Those two tax credits are provide the single biggest poverty lifting agent. They are the single biggest combined poverty lifting agents, second only to Social Security. So when we had the child tax credits in place that the Democrats championed, we saw millions of children lifted out of poverty. That should be a goal. Children are not responsible. They should not live in poverty, right, in this country, particularly when their parents are working full time, which is another issue. So there is broad support for that. I think one thing that the president did very well was remind people, look, inflation is a problem, but he does not want to address inflation by making people poor. We want to address inflation by putting more money in people's pocket, particularly those working poor people and particularly the middle class. So he talked about raising the minimum wage. He also talked about the fact that 6.6 million jobs have been added since he took office. That's the largest since we've tracked those numbers in the history of the presidency. So I think that was important too, to show people that we are moving in the right direction. And he had a chance to do that with this message, which allowed him to speak directly, unfiltered, to the American public. And so I thought that was another key point that he needed to do to reassure people, remind and reassure.
Joel, let me ask you this. So President Biden's inflation plan, it really did sound a lot like his Build Back Better plan. It didn't get much, if any, applause from the Republicans, which they voted down. So where does Biden go from here?
Look, the hard truth is that the American people may not be economists, but they're also not fools. If you take $20 out of my left pocket and put $10 back in my right pocket, you haven't given me anything. You actually are a pickpocket. And similarly, if you have, by government mandate, millions of Americans fired on one day, and then we have 6.6 million Americans hired on another, once we have finally beaten back a once-in-a-generational pandemic, that is not job growth. That is us trying to return to the status quo. So the problem with the plan that the president has set forth is that it does not acknowledge the reality that, yes, Social Security and the child tax credit are both excellent ways to make sure that we can beat back poverty. But both of them also are dependent on the fact that the American dollar remains intact. And the fact that we have printed money like there is no tomorrow to deal with this virus of foreign origin, for which we have yet to hold the nation of origin accountable, has already wiped out the largest increase in a generation that seniors have seen as a result of the inflation, has driven the fact that we have American people paying $400 million a day in additional fuel costs versus where we were a year ago. And so this notion that we're going to go and have the relief valve, $30 million barrels of extra gas, I'll remind the American people that is barely enough to get us through one day of fuel usage here in this nation, much less deal with the pricing crisis that is crippling the American family and making their business and finances more complicated. So yes, again, I think whether you're talking about the moonshot for cancer that the president talked about, whether you're talking about inflation, he is clearly talking about the right issues. Is the plan there executable? I would submit to the American people they are not.
Out of time here, real quick. Letter grade each. Tara?
I give him a B+.
Joe?
I would give him a B+ for style. I would give him a C- for substance.
Okay.
All right. Democrat analyst Tara Dowdell and Republican analyst Joe Pinion, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you so much.
All right. The time right now is 8:22.